This video contains extremely disturbing and distressing topics. The contents of this video may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Unit 731, short for Manchu Detachment 731, was a covert biological and chemical warfare research and development unit of the Imperial Japanese Army that engaged in lethal human experimentation and the production of biological weapons during the Second Sino-Japanese War and World War II. It was also known as the Kamo Detachment 198 and the Ishii Unit. It had active divisions all throughout China and Southeast Asia and was headquartered in the Pinfang district of Harbin. Unit 731 was officially known as the Epidemic Prevention and Water Purification Department of the Kwantung Army, initially set up by the Kenpitai military police of the Empire of Japan. General Shiro Ishii, a combat medic officer in the Kwantung Army, took it over and commanded it until the end of the war. The facility itself was built in 1935 as a replacement for the Zongma fortress, and Ishii and his team used it to expand their capabilities. Until the end of the war in 1945, the Japanese government generously supported the program. Unit 731 and the other units ran biological weapon production, testing, deployment, and storage facilities. Unit 731 was responsible for some of the worst war crimes committed by the Japanese armed forces. It regularly conducted tests on people who were dehumanized and internally referred to as logs. Unit 731 and its related units like Unit 1644 and Unit 100 conducted horrific experiments on human subjects during World War II. The victims of Unit 731 were kidnapped men, women, including pregnant women, and children, but also babies born from the systematic rape perpetrated by the staff inside the compound. The victims were of different nationalities, with the majority being Chinese and a significant minority being Russian. Unit 731 also produced biological weapons that were used in Chinese cities and towns, water sources, and fields, and in areas that were not occupied by Japanese forces. It is estimated that Unit 731 and its related programs killed up to 500,000 people, and none of the inmates survived. In the final moments of the Second World War, all prisoners were killed to hide the evidence. There were no survivors. These inhumane tests involved various forms of torture and exposure to deadly agents. The victims were subjected to starvation and dehydration to study the effects and time until death. They were placed in low-pressure chambers, leading to the gruesome popping of their eyes from their sockets. The researchers explored the relationship between temperature, burns, and human survival by inflicting burns on the victims, hanging them upside down, crushing them with heavy objects, electrocuting, dehydrating with hot fans, and injecting them with toxic substances were among the other sadistic practices carried out by the unit. The victims were exposed to a range of deadly toxins, such as tetrodotoxin, heroin, Korean bindweed, and ricin, among others. In some cases, massive amounts of blood were drained from prisoners to study the effects of blood loss. Dehydration experiments involved starving victims before depriving them of water, causing their bodies to deteriorate significantly. Unit 731 also conducted transfusion experiments with different blood types, noting the adverse effect on subjects who received blood types incompatible with their own. In one particularly appalling incident, a Western man was observed vertically cut into 2 pieces and preserved in a jar of formaldehyde. Unit 100 also experimented with toxic gas using phone booth-like tanks as portable gas chambers. Some tests, such as freezing 3-day-old babies to death, were just psychopathically sadistic with no conceivable military application. Gas experiments were another gruesome aspect of their research, where chemical agents like mustard gas, cyanic acid gas, white phosphorus, Adamsite, and phosphine gas were tested on prisoners. Gas chambers were used for these experiments, and the victims were exposed to an overwhelming number of rounds of gas, causing severe damage to their skin, eyes, respiratory, and digestive organs. The extent of the long-term consequences on the subjects remains undocumented. Thousands of men, women, children, and infants were subjected to vivisection. performed without anesthesia and usually lethal. Vivisection is the practice of surgery on a living organism for experimental purposes. In a video interview, former Unit 731 member Okawa Fukumatsu admitted to having vivisected a pregnant woman. Prisoners were first infected with various diseases and then the vivisections were performed. Researchers performed invasive surgery on prisoners and removed organs to study the effects of disease on the human body. In order to study blood loss, limbs of prisoners were amputated. The removed limbs were sometimes reattached to the opposite side of victims' bodies. Stomachs of some prisoners were surgically removed and their esophagus were reattached to the intestines. Others had parts of organs such as the brain, lungs, and livers removed. Ken Yuasa, an Imperial Japanese Army surgeon, suggests that the practice of vivisection on human subjects was widespread even outside Unit 731. Estimated that at least 1,000 Japanese personnel were involved in the practice in mainland China. Yuasa said that when he performed the vivisection on captives, they were all for practice rather than for research, and that such practices were routine among Japanese doctors stationed in China during the war. A former member of Unit 731, a medical assistant, was anonymously interviewed by the New York Times, and he recounted his first experience in dissecting a live human being who had been deliberately infected with the plague for the purpose of developing plague bombs. He said, "The fellow knew that it was over for him, and so he didn't struggle when they led him into the room and tied him down. But when I picked up the scalpel, that's when he began screaming. I cut him open from the chest to the stomach and he screamed terribly, and his face was all twisted in agony. He made this unimaginable sound. He was screaming so horribly, but then finally he stopped. This was all in a day's work for the surgeons, but it really left an impression on me because it was my first time." Unit 731, along with its affiliated units, engaged in extensive research, development, and experimental deployment of biowarfare weapons during World War II. These deadly weapons targeted the Chinese population, both military and civilian. One method involved the use of plague-infected flea bred in the laboratories of Unit 731 and Unit 1644, which were then dispersed over Chinese cities. Tragically, these actions led to devastating bubonic plague epidemics that claimed tens of thousands of lives. Another disturbing expedition involved the intentional spread of typhoid and paratyphoid germs into the city's wells, marshes, and houses, as well as infusing them into snacks distributed to locals. This resulted in deadly epidemics, with researchers expressing satisfaction that paratyphoid fever proved to be the one of the most effective pathogens. Over the course of World War II, at least 12 large-scale bioweapon field trials were conducted, attacking at least 11 Chinese cities with biological agents. An attack on Shanghai in 1941 reportedly caused close to 10,000 biological casualties and 1,700 deaths among ill-prepared Japanese troops, mainly due to cholera. Prisoners were subjected to tests with bubonic plague, cholera, smallpox, botulism, and other diseases. These experiments ultimately led to the development of defoliation bacilli bomb and the flea bomb, both utilized for spreading bubonic plague. Japanese soldiers were able to launch biological attacks by infecting agriculture, reservoir, wells, and other areas with anthrax and plague carrier flea, as well as typhoid, cholera, and other deadly pathogens. Researchers, protected in suits, would observe the dying victims during biological bomb experiments. Furthermore, poisoned food and candy were sneakily given to unsuspecting victims, and infected supplies, clothing, and plague flea were dropped on various targets from airplanes. As a result of these cruel actions, cholera, anthrax, and plague alone were estimated to have claimed the lives of at least 400,000 Chinese civilians. Additionally, the Chinese were subjected to testing with tularemia, a bacterial infection found in a variety of animals that can spread from animals to humans. As World War II neared its end, Unit 731 planned a horrifying operation known as Cherry Blossoms at Night, intending to use kamikaze pilots to spread the plague in San Diego, California, scheduled for 22 September 1945. Fortunately, Japan surrendered 5 weeks earlier, preventing this nightmarish scheme from being executed. Female prisoners at Unit 731 were subjected to appalling experiments, including forced pregnancies for the purpose of studying vertical transmission of diseases, specifically syphilis. The stated reason for this torture was to investigate the potential transmission of infections from mother to child. The researchers were particularly interested in fetal survival and the impact on the reproductive organs of the mothers. Despite numerous babies being born in captivity, there are no accounts of any survivors from Unit 731, raising suspicions that the children of female prisoners were either killed shortly after birth or subjected to forced abortions. While male prisoners were often used in isolated experiments to avoid variables, women were subjected to bacteriological or psychological tests, sex experiments, and horrific sex crimes. A chilling testimony from a unit member who served as a guard vividly illustrated the reality of their actions. On one occasion, with time to spare before a scheduled human experiment, 2 unit members opened the cell of a Chinese woman and one of them assaulted her, while the other unlocked another cell that housed a woman who had previously been used in a frostbite experiment. This woman had several fingers missing, her bones were blackened with gangrene, and her body was in a state of severe decay. The perpetrator abandoned his plans to assault her upon witnessing her festering and infected genitalia. Disturbingly, they later went on with their experimental work as if nothing had happened. While Unit 731 researchers arrested by the Soviet forces were tried at the December 1949 war crime trials, those captured by the United States were secretly given immunity in exchange for the data gathered during their human experiments. Immunity from prosecution is a doctrine of international law that allows an accused to avoid prosecution for criminal offenses. Basically, the US said, "If you give us the data of the experiment, we will let you go." The United States covered up the human experimentations and handed stipends to the perpetrators. The Americans co-opted the researchers' bioweapons information and experience for use in their own biological warfare program. On 28 August 2002, Tokyo District Court ruled that Japan had committed biological warfare in China and consequently had slaughtered many residents. The actions of Unit 731 and its affiliated units represent some of the most heinous crimes against humanity during World War II, leaving an unerasable scar on history.